more importantly, there's charges laid in a string of deliberately set fires in Alberta. And of course, over the last 2 years, there was a lot of, I guess you could call it arson against churches that happened across the country. Adam, I know you've been really close to this story. Do you want to give us the details?
Yeah, so and I know some of the vandalism in our next story. We're going to touch on that as well, though. Lots of this being sort of investigated. It's interesting. Last night on social media, and this is not necessarily confirmed yet, but I did see a number of people stating that like a series of fires was being set even along highways. So there is clearly, obviously, it wasn't this individual because they've now been detained. But some of these fires taking place, I know we saw at Siksika Nation there was an attempted fire. Fortunately, the church was saved, but there was damage. Fires being set at random spots, but also we saw the church. I believe it was in Bonnyville, burnt down. Significant, massive issues are taking place when you have churches being burnt down. I know in Ontario a while back, Justin, there's a bit of vandalism on a mosque, and Justin Trudeau went there straight away. He's yet to visit some of these locations where churches have been burnt down. It's particularly heart wrenching because in many of these communities, the church most recently that burned down was the Latter Day Saints Church. But I know, for example, one of the churches in Calgary that fell victim to arson was a Vietnamese community church. So they escaped persecution in communist Vietnam, come to Canada, seeking this new seeking religious freedom, and then no association whatsoever with the residential schools. They weren't here. Their church wasn't established here, but they fall victim to this arson. I believe on this case, they don't. There hasn't been a direct affirmation that this was a hate motivated incident unless there's been new developments on this. But regardless, someone setting fires near or around churches and those churches going up in flames, well, that should be international or at the very least national news. This is an absolutely massive story, but it doesn't particularly feed into any sort of narrative. So I think, unfortunately, while there is news coverage of this, it's not to the degree that I think would be appropriate.
No, well, to say the least. And maybe the silver lining here is that we're at least not, as a country, arresting pastors anymore for hosting church services. It may still be certainly unfortunate that there are arsonists, vandals who are acting very inappropriately towards these facilities, but at least it's not the government doing it this time. Yeah, sorry.
Well, and you just touched on something perfect there. The next story that definitely ties into this pretty strongly, and it's another one that we covered very closely, was the string of vandalism that we saw at churches across Calgary. Not arson in these cases, but paint being splattered all over these churches. So the individual who they identified some time ago has finally had their sort of court matters settled, and they've confirmed that they were involved in 4 churches. Whether they were in coordination with other people, I think it was something like 11 churches were targeted in total. But here we have the 4 churches that were vandalized, painted. Some of the churches left the paint up, some of it's already been cleaned up. But they get 3 months to be served at home for committing numerous hate crimes across the city. Meanwhile, we saw numerous pastors in jail for months for opening their churches and refusing to eject people. In some of these cases, they weren't forcing people to be masked. They had safety measures in place. But I just want to point out the absurd and glaring double standard there. You can go around committing and being charged on hate motivated crimes, vandalizing numerous churches, and you get to stay at home for a couple months. Obviously, I'm sure there's more restrictions in place and nobody wants that, but that is a serious crime. I guarantee you, if that had happened to a mosque, that person would be in jail, period. And I also find it absolutely absurd that these court systems can see fit to keep pastors with virtually no criminal history whatsoever, or no criminal history whatsoever, behind bars for months as dangerous people, and then actual criminals like these who aren't violating sort of impromptu fly-by-night COVID-19 restrictions, but are committing hate crimes, they get a slap on the wrist and they get to stay at home.
Yeah, welcome to Canada, right? That seems to be the new motto, at least under our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And of course, as much as it is the pastors across the country as well, I remember my time in Quebec, in Montreal, there's a community there in Outremont, and there's synagogues were being targeted by the SPVM, the local police. And they were being harassed in all sorts of ways. It's very unfortunate, but it is certainly a good thing that the government has decided to take a step back from that angle at least. And unfortunately, these individuals have still committed these crimes against. And it is good that there is some justice that is being brought, even if it isn't necessarily the what has been sought by everyone.
Yeah, it is. It is, again, it's one of these cases of eventually the courts hopefully getting it right. Hopefully that is what we're seeing here. But what they did with these pastors is send a message. That's what they were doing. They were very clearly making an example. And once all was said and done, most of these charges sort of dissipated. They wanted to make an example. What example does it set when largely Christian churches are being targeted across the country? I think we're into I think we're nearly 70 now or more churches, places of worship, have been targeted either by vandalism or arson. There's clearly an emerging trend of anti-Christian sentiment in this country and here in this province. What message does it send when, in the face of that, you get a slap on the wrist? That is a serious concern for me, and it's reflective of the general anti-Christian sentiment within society. It seems like a perfect opportunity to throw to save the Christians, but
that's a clip from something we call Rebel News Daily. It's our daily live stream hosted by my friend David Menzies, but the show also includes a rotating cast of hosts and special guests, including me. It's a great way for us to talk about the news of the day as the news is happening in an unscripted fashion, and it's an awesome way for you to interact with us as well. We stream every weekday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Mountain, wherever you find Rebel News. See you there.